Hey there! Welcome back to the Dreamland Encounters. Here on this channel, I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I'm Travis Morgan and I've been working at Kotner Auto on Columbus's east side for years. Starting out with basic tasks like changing tires and oil, I now focus on more complex work like diagnostics and electrical repairs. Our shop is pretty straightforward, a family-run spot with 4 bays and a fenced lot tucked away behind a strip mall near Mount Carmel. Last October, something weird happened during a late shift. Dave had left early for a school event and Mr. Kotner was already gone. I was alone in the shop, which I actually enjoy. Those quiet moments when the compressors stop are peaceful. I was working on a Ford Edge in Bay 3, replacing a rear wiring harness that had been chewed through, probably by wildlife. My music was playing softly in the background. Suddenly, everything changed. The lights flickered briefly, just a split second where everything cut out. Shop lights, music, laptop, all went dark and then immediately came back. I checked the breaker panel, but nothing seemed amiss. We'd had electrical issues before, but this was different. As I continued working, something even stranger occurred. The motion sensors in the lot all triggered simultaneously. Every single floodlight outside snapped on at once. These lights are set up in 3 separate zones: front drive, side alley, and fenced yard, and they typically don't interact. You could usually move in one area without setting off lights in another. But this time, they all lit up together. I shut off my drill and stepped outside. The air was cold enough to see my breath, but completely still. No wind, no passing cars, just an eerie silence across the strip mall. Darkness seemed to envelop everything except the bright lights. The Pizza Hut 2 doors down sat black and quiet. Standing in the middle of the lot, I scanned my surroundings. Absolutely nothing moved. No people, no activity. The bright lights created a strange, flat color that made everything look surreal. I stood frozen, probably with my mouth open, watching the 3 dim orange lights glide incredibly slowly from the west, just above the treetops behind the shop. They moved with a strange heaviness, as if connected to something massive, yet effortlessly moving. Not like any typical aircraft, these lights formed a perfect triangular shape, 1 leading and 2 behind, like a flat arrowhead. The most bizarre part was the complete absence of anything connecting them. No outline, no visible structure, just 3 points moving in perfect synchronization, as if linked by an invisible force. Silent and steady, it crawled directly over the shop. Its speed was maybe 15 or 20 miles per hour, slower than any plane I'd ever seen. No wings, no body, nothing reflected, just 3 constant orange, glowing points. A strange sensation pressed against my chest as it passed. Not exactly fear, but more like underwater pressure. Breathing became difficult for a few seconds, and my eyes watered slightly. Then it continued east, disappearing over the strip mall. I remained motionless until it vanished. Snapping out of my trance, I ran into the office and pulled up the security footage. Camera by camera, I checked everywhere: front lot, back fence, alley, inside bays. Nothing but static lights and empty pavement. Even when I reviewed the exact moment it passed overhead, the cameras showed absolutely nothing. No video evidence, no dark shape, just emptiness. Last December, right after the first big snow, I was doing my usual morning rounds on the farm near Delaware, Ohio. The farm's been in our family for 3 generations, and we often set up just a couple hundred acres of corn. This was different from the typical Midwest scene, which is usually quiet, especially after sunset. That's when I spotted something strange in one of the cornfields I hadn't harvested yet. About 50 feet of one row had its stalks bent at a perfect 90-degree angle right in the middle. Not broken or snapped, just precisely folded. This wasn't normal snow or wind damage, and it definitely didn't look like animal tracks. When something typically tramples a cornfield, you see broken stalks or crushed plants. But this looked intentional. I ran my hand along the stalks. They were stiff but completely unbroken. The morning started with a light dusting of snow across the field. Everything looked normal, but something felt off about the corn rows. A strange, deliberate bend that seemed unnatural. I snapped a few photos on my phone, though they never quite captured the scene's peculiarity. Later that night, an unsettling silence settled over everything. No wind, no usual nighttime sounds, just complete quiet. Around 11:30 p.m., a noise on the roof jolted me awake. Something was pacing up their deliberate, heavy steps. Not animals scurrying, but something large moving with careful precision. 4 or 5 steps, then a pause, then the same measured rhythm again. I lay completely still, listening. When morning came, I investigated. The roof looked untouched. Fresh snow lay smooth as glass, with no footprints or marks on the shingles. I checked around the house, barn, and shed. No tracks anywhere. The snow remained pristine, as if nothing had disturbed it all night. A sense of unease crept over me. The noise had been real, yet left no trace. Returning to the field, I took a closer look at the bent corn. Something caught my eye. The folded stalks weren't random. They formed a subtle, repeating spiral shape, almost like a loose coil running the length of the row. It seemed deliberate, as if the corn was trying to point or communicate something. Running my fingers over the stalks, I could still feel a lingering coldness. The scene looked intact, like cardboard sharply creased but not torn. No tire tracks, no footprints, nothing else disturbed. Just that one perfectly straight line of folded stalks. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe uneven snow weight, but something felt off. Later that night, a triangle passed over the lot. No movement, just silent passage. I shut everything down and drove home, barely sleeping. I didn't tell anyone. It felt too strange to explain. A few nights later, I came in to check a missed parts delivery. The radio in Bay 2 was on, low volume tuned to static. I hadn't used that radio in weeks. Everything else was untouched, doors locked, but that radio had definitely been off before. Since then, I've kept a big crank flashlight in my truck. No batteries. I don't trust power like I used to. Weeks later, I'm still thinking about what I saw that night. I was hauling a load from Cleveland to Indianapolis that spring evening, driving through northwest Ohio after dark. Dave Carter, a truck driver with over 15 years on the road, I pulled into a small, quiet rest area near Lima to take a break and have something to eat from my cooler. The rest area was quiet, almost eerily so. No crickets chirping. The cornfield had been a mystery for weeks. Every morning I checked, but the stock remained folded in a precise spiral pattern. It looked almost maintained, though I never saw anyone tending to it. The idea of setting up cameras crossed my mind, but I'm not one for modern gadgets. Besides, something about the situation felt like it was watching me just as intently as I was watching it. One afternoon, a movement near the tree line caught my eye. I initially thought it might be a deer or a stray dog, but whatever it was vanished into the woods without a sound. No rustling, no breaking branches, just gone. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. Then last week, something strange happened. I was working in the barn when the power suddenly cut out across the entire area. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped outside. The night sky was crystal clear, stars sharp and bright. In the distance, beyond the trees, a faint glow emerged. This wasn't like typical town lights. It was a steady, soft blue reminiscent of police emergency lights. The glow lingered for about 5 minutes before disappearing completely, and the power restored just as abruptly. It felt like a message, though its meaning remained unclear. Now the corn's been harvested, and the field looks entirely normal. No bent stalks, no patterns, nothing. The snow has melted, leaving soft, muddy ground. But even now, when I'm alone, I sometimes hear a quiet pacing on the roof, or catch a glimpse of that strange blue light through the trees. Each time, the hair on my arm stands up. I can't explain what happened in that field. I don't know if it was someone watching, something manipulating the landscape, or just my mind trying to make sense of these unexplained events. But one thing I'm certain of, that perfect sharp spiral pattern wasn't a coincidence, and whatever moved across my roof that night left absolutely no trace behind. Porch light on, half expecting the pacing to return, but there was only silence. Days passed, and the mystery remained unexplained. The night was eerily quiet. No highway sounds, just absolute silence. I'd parked in a typical roadside lot with scattered trucks and dim streetlights. Something immediately felt strange with my phone. The battery was dropping rapidly, from 80% to 60% in just minutes. It wasn't particularly cold, so that didn't explain the sudden drain. When I glanced up, I saw it. A soft, dim orange glow hovering above the distant tree line. This wasn't like city lights or a sunset. Instead, it resembled a lantern suspended in invisible fog, completely motionless and hanging low in the sky. Not bright enough to cast shadows, but undeniably present. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if fatigue was playing tricks on me. I wasn't drinking, just tired from a long day of driving. As I moved around, I noticed something even more bizarre. My phone's battery drained faster when I was away from the truck. Stepping back inside, the drain stopped completely. Attempting to start the truck produced only a dead clicking sound, though the cab lights worked fine. I wasn't panicked. I had jumper cables and could call for help if needed. So I paced around, scanning the area with my flashlight. A few trucks in the distance had running engines, but no one was outside. That orange glow remained, seemingly waiting for something. After about 10 minutes, I tried the engine again. This time it started immediately. As I prepared to leave, the glow vanished completely, as if it had never existed. My phone's battery was back to 78% and stable. I work maintenance for a small wind farm in southern Idaho. It's not a glamorous job, just 2 turbines spread across a few hundred acres past the Snake River. Most days I'm walking dirt access roads alone, checking panels, grease points and cables. Back in October, I switched to the evening shift to cover for a co-worker whose wife was having a baby. My hours ran from 2 p.m. to around 10 p.m., which wasn't bad. That week had been unusually calm. No storms, no wildlife disrupting the equipment. I was mainly logging numbers and running diagnostics. Like always, I carried a standard Motorola handheld radio to check in with dispatch every couple of hours. During my usual night shift at the wind farm, I was walking the grounds when a strange sound caught my attention through the radio. It was a rhythmic breathing that lasted about 10 minutes before stopping. At first, I didn't report it, assuming it was just random radio interference from a trucker or farm crew. The next night, the same thing happened near Turbine 2. While the location was different, the signal was identical. What struck me as odd was how the sound only appeared when I wasn't speaking. The moment I'd key the mic and talk, it would go silent. As soon as I stopped, the static returned. This time, the sound persisted longer. I walked around trying to understand its origin. Strangely, it followed me, moving with my steps. The audio was too low to distinguish clearly, but I started recording it on the radio's voice memo function, mostly to prove to my supervisor that I wasn't imagining things. Back home, I transferred the recording to my laptop and listened through headphones. The first minute was just typical sounds, my footsteps, breathing, gravel, crunching. Then the static began. Initially, I thought it was the same pulsing pattern, but when I increased the volume, something changed. On Wednesday, while doing a loop around Turbine 9, I started picking up strange static. It wasn't full white noise, but little pulses and blips like catching a distant transmission. The sound was low and faint. I figured maybe highway patrol or a nearby farm was bleeding into our channels, which happens occasionally. I checked the signal strength, 2 bars. Weird, but not impossible. I spoke into the mic, a simple Unit 3 checking channel, but got no response. Just that same intermittent pulse. Switching channels didn't help. The static continued coming and going in bursts, sometimes 2 in a row. As I pulled back onto the highway later, my radio started crackling with static and faint voices, like someone was trying to communicate from far away. It lasted only seconds before fading out. I adjusted the dial, but nothing else came through. The rest of the trip was uneventful. I kept watching the sky for that orange glow, but it never reappeared. At home, I fully charged my phone and checked its battery health. No issues. The truck started fine the next day too. I can't explain what happened, but I vividly remember that glow, how my phone drained, and how the truck wouldn't start until the strange phenomenon disappeared. All I wanted was to get home safe. The static caught my attention, something clearly different this time. Beneath the noise, a sound emerged. Not quite a voice, but breathing. Not my own, but slower and deeper. One long, drawn-out breath every 6 or 7 seconds. Inhale, hold, exhale. The static seemed woven from the breath itself, not just surrounding it. I stopped the recording midway and listened to my house. Nothing appeared wrong, yet something felt off. The next day, I brought the radio to work and asked my co-workers about interference. Derek, who also worked night shifts, brushed it off with jokes about ham radio signals or military transmissions. I kept the breathing to myself. That night, I switched to Channel 6, a frequency we rarely use. My 15 years of long-haul trucking had seen many nights, but this late March 2018 evening in Nebraska was different. Hauling fertilizer from South City toward Colorado Springs, I mostly followed Route 83. The landscape was familiar. Empty land, gas stations with terrible coffee, and that impossibly remote stretch between North Platte and Makuk. Around 9:15, near Turbine 12, the static returned. One continuous, unbroken hiss. The radio seemed normal at first, then something shifted. A hiss changed pitch, almost like a Doppler effect, but without movement. I looked around. No wind, no animals, nothing. I tapped the mic. You named 3. Open comms. Anyone out there? Silence followed. After releasing the mic button, another breath came through, louder this time, directly from the speaker. Not a recording, but live. The sound wasn't mechanical, yet not quite human. It felt massive, like a lung the size of a furnace. I backed away from the turbine, scanning the road and field's edge. Visibility ended after just 10 feet. Nothing but empty scrub. No fences, no real trees, just sage, dirt, and distant hills. I switched the radio off, then back on. Complete silence. My last evening shift that week was supposed to be routine. Covering for another guy closing out the week, I was near the battery bank on the south end when the radio suddenly came to life by itself. It jumped from channel 1 to 3, then 5, each time producing only static. Finally, it settled on channel 2, our primary frequency. I was driving my usual route through the open country, a long stretch of highway bordered by fields and barbed wire. Night driving out here means total isolation. No towns, no truck stops, just endless road. When something goes wrong, you're completely alone. One night, just past 9 p.m. near mile marker 211, I noticed something strange on the CB radio. I always keep it on low, but this wasn't normal static or background noise. A mechanical clicking emerged, fast and precise like a typewriter. It cycled evenly across all channels, almost embedded in the signal itself. Adjusting the squelch did nothing. I scanned the landscape, nothing but open fields under a clear sky. Then I saw it, a star behaving differently. At first I thought it was just a windshield smudge. Tapping and wiping changed nothing. Every time the clicking hit a specific rhythm, 3 quick beats. Then one slow, the star would shift slightly left, maybe an inch from my perspective. When I killed the CB, the clicking stopped, but the star kept moving. Driving at 65, I watched it remain sharp and white, twitching periodically. Past marker 213, it stopped moving, and the sky returned to normal. Curiosity pulled me back the next night. Northbound around 9:20 p.m., the pattern repeated exactly. Approaching marker 213, the clicking started. That same bright star sat motionless until the rhythm triggered its slight leftward movement. I tried calling out on the CB, hoping someone else was nearby. Silence. No response, not even the usual squelch feedback. Once I crossed marker 211, everything went quiet again. Over the next few nights, I timed its behavior carefully. Then I heard something unexpected, my own voice from the previous day. The recording played exactly as it happened before. Unit 3, open comms. Anyone out there? Followed by that same pause and breath. I shut everything off and drove back to the shop, skipping the usual checklist. The next week, I grabbed a new radio unit without explanation. The old one likely remains in a drawer. Since then, nothing unusual has occurred. No static, no mysterious voices. I still have the recording on my laptop, but I haven't played it again. One evening in late July, while walking my Black Lab Mix Casey through our small Montana neighborhood, the day's scorching heat still hung in the air. The asphalt was tacky underfoot, and pine sap baked on tree bark. Around 8:30, the temperature felt like standing next to an open oven. Though Casey seemed unbothered, my trucking experiences began with strange occurrences between mile markers 211 and 213. On one particularly windy night, moonlight revealed rippling grain fields. Suddenly, everything went eerily quiet. The wind vanished completely, and no sound came from the Rigor Road. Just silence and odd clicks. That night, something peculiar caught my attention. The star shifted and my interior dome light flickered briefly. A single subtle pulse, like a momentary voltage drop. My gauges remained steady, and the engine ran smoothly, but the light definitely dimmed for an instant. I kept both hands on the wheel, avoiding the CB, while soft clicking continued, feeling almost like a scheduled check-in. Over the next month, I drove through that stretch 4 more times. Each occurrence followed the same precise pattern, exclusively between markers 211 and 213, only between 9:10 and 9:40 p.m. once. I pulled over at mile marker 212 and idled with the CB on. The clicking grew more intense, not louder, but more present, as if creeping closer to my consciousness. The star moved again, pulsing slightly brighter for half a second. My dome light flickered in sync. Then came that distinct smell of hot copper and ozone, a scent I'd only encountered once before, after an inverter fried in an old cab. I immediately threw the truck in gear and kept moving. Afterward, I avoided that route, telling dispatch I preferred going west through Ogallala. It cost me extra hours, but I didn't care. My last drive through that section was in January 2020, just before quitting the road. Snow lined the shoulders, and a full moon illuminated a clear sky. I'd almost forgotten about these encounters when suddenly around 9:15, the CV popped once. No clicking, just a single pop, then complete silence. When I looked up, the star had already shifted, seeming to have been watching ahead of schedule. Casey and I were walking our usual route down Morgan Street when something bizarre occurred. My breath emerged as white fog, sharp and distinct like a winter morning. I paused, breathed again, and watched another clear puff hang suspended in the air. Casey seemed completely unaware, still nosing around a mailbox post with her typical curiosity. I slowly rotated, scanning my surroundings. No wind stirred. No strange sounds broke the silence. The sun balanced low behind the tree line, just kissing the horizon. Then the cold hit, not a gradual cooling, but an instant plunge like stepping into an industrial freezer. Goosebumps raced across my skin. I tugged Casey's leash, eager to move forward. She hesitated, lifted her nose to sniff the air, then resumed walking. Within a few steps, the temperature nosedived. My ears burned, my nose ran. To my right, a small metal fence post transformed before my eyes. Frost spread across its surface in a crusty silver layer, moving with an almost unnatural speed. I stared, blinking, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My hand started to reach out, then stopped an inch away. The cold wasn't just evening chill, this was dead of winter freezing. Casey growled, a soft but steady sound. Her body went rigid, ears pulled back, tail lowered. Without warning, she barked sharply and spun on the sidewalk. Her lunge was so powerful it threw me off balance. The leash wrapped tightly around my wrist as I gripped it firmly. Then, just as suddenly, the cold vanished like someone had flipped a switch. One moment my breath was foggy and teeth chattering. The next, we were back to the sticky, dry heat of the day. No fog, no frost, and somehow the leash was gone. Heart racing, arms feeling like they'd been plunged into ice water, I chased after Casey. She bolted down the street, tail tucked, moving in that panicked, half-hunched way dogs do when pure terror takes over. 3 blocks later, she was scratching frantically at our front door. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, and she immediately darted inside, hiding under the table. Standing on the porch, I caught my breath and surveyed the scene. Everything looked perfectly normal. Crickets chirping, porch lights glowing, sprinklers casting misty light, yet something felt profoundly wrong. The street was too quiet, too pristine, like a scene meticulously staged for an unknown purpose. I've spent years tracking satellites and watching for meteorites, an amateur astronomy hobby I picked up in college. That particular night in Maple Ridge, a small Ohio town, I set up my Celestron mech star behind the old high school baseball field around 9:15. The janitor was cool about me parking there, provided I kept the area clean. With temperatures in the mid-40s and a light western breeze, the night was crystal clear. About 40 minutes into my observation, something unusual caught my eye. A formation of lights approached from the northeast, hovering around 30 Ds above the horizon. Initially, I thought it might be a military night exercise. We weren't far from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base after all. 6 lights moved in a V formation reminiscent of geese in flight. 5 of these lights blinked like typical aircraft, but the 6th light at the back right remained constant, white and unblinking. Something felt off. I could hear a low, distant hum of engines, yet the steady, white light produced no sound at all. Intrigued, I pulled out my phone's flight radar app. Nothing showed up in that direction, not even the blinking lights. Using my telescope, I zoomed in closer. The 5 blinking lights revealed faint outlines, wings, tail fins. Each shimmer, definitely jets, most likely F-16s, but that 6th light was different. Completely different. Days earlier, an odd incident had occurred during a walk with my dog, Casey. We'd been near a fence post, and something inexplicable happened, though I couldn't quite define what. Casey had become unusually anxious, hiding near some water and staying close afterward. When I checked my wrist, there were no marks from any leash, despite a strange sensation. I retraced our walking route that night. The fence post looked normal, metal still warm from the day's heat. Dry, scratchy grass surrounded the area. Though the strange feeling had faded, I couldn't complete our usual walking loop. The next morning, I discovered my short leash was missing. I searched everywhere, laundry room, couch cushions, car trunk, finding nothing. Even a daylight street walk revealed no trace. I knew I hadn't dropped it. I'd felt it on my wrist when it vanished. We skipped walks for a few days. When I bought a replacement leash, same brand and length, it felt strange in my hand. Casey seemed mostly fine, occasionally barking at dark windows, a habit she'd always had. I never experienced that bone-chilling coldness again, not so suddenly or deeply. A cold sensation swept through me, quick but distinct. Something about that space felt altered. We now crossed that block without thinking, the Leechnin never reappearing. The air moves differently there. During a telescope observation, I noticed something unusual among a group of 6 jets. 5 flew in a tight V formation, but one light behaved differently. White and about the same size as the others, it didn't distort, flicker, or reflect light. While its companions continued westward at around 20,000 feet, this unblinking light stopped right over the field. A pure white sphere, solid and unmoving, no outline, no shadow. Unlike stars that shimmer, this remained perfectly still. For a full minute, silence. Then, without warning, it moved straight up. Not an arc, not gradual acceleration, just an immediate vertical climb, like a cursor being dragged upward on a screen. Smooth, precise. It rose to about twice its original height and stopped. A slight tremor ran through me. Not panic, but that unsettling feeling when something defies explanation. I've tracked satellites, watched the ISS countless times. This was different. I stepped back, observing with naked eyes. The light was dimmer now, higher up, but still that steady white. Then it blinked. 1 full second of brightness, then gone. I waited. Nothing. Wind rustled, dry leaves across the field. I realized I'd been holding my breath. Another blink, another second-long flash, slightly higher than before. I sensed it was still climbing. The transition was jarring dark sky to bright light in an instant. No flare, no fade, like switching between frames. As suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. I packed up quickly, mind racing. Late September last year, I had just moved into my quiet apartment in Salem, Massachusetts. I moved into an older brick building on a side street. Nothing special but affordable and close to downtown. The neighborhood was quiet, with neighbors who mostly kept to themselves. I was settling in nicely, unpacking, establishing routines, enjoying the proximity to work and parks. 2 large windows faced the street, one in the living room, one in the bedroom. The street lamp outside cast a soft yellowish glow at night. I noticed how the room's corners remained unusually dark, even with lights on. Something about those shadowy spaces lingered in my mind. The first encounter happened while I was casually scrolling on my phone, lying on the couch. Just at the edge of my vision, a shapeless shadow appeared beyond the living room window. It wasn't a person or a tree, but a dark, undefined form, like a smudge or indistinct silhouette. The moment I turned to look directly, it vanished completely. Over the next week, these strange glimpses continued. Always in room corners or just outside windows, the shape had no clear boundaries. Just a dark presence hovering as if observing from a distance. I tried rationalizing it away, attributing the experiences to work stress and exhaustion, but the feeling grew increasingly heavy. About a week after moving in, everything changed. While making dinner in the kitchen, I saw the shape again, this time positioned between the living room and hallway. After that night, my life shifted dramatically. My once frequent equipment setups dwindled from 3 or 4 times a week to maybe once or twice a month. I haven't shared this with anyone in town. It's the kind of place where people discuss lawnmowers, and I'm already known as the space guy. I don't need to be labeled crazy, too. After that night, I checked satellite logs meticulously. Nothing had passed overhead in that window. No weather balloons, no military flight notices. The experience fundamentally changed me. I no longer view flight formations the same way. When it happened, the shape faded like smoke, leaving an unsettling sensation that something wasn't right. Initially, I tried convincing myself it was a trick of light or shadow from the street lamp, but its vanishing wasn't normal. No gradual fade, no flicker, just instantaneous disappearance. Occasional whispers and soft rustling sounds would drift through the apartment during complete silence. Each unexplained moment added to the growing unease. I tossed everything into the Jeep and left, knowing something profound had shifted in my understanding of reality. I started noticing weird things happening in my home, and they were getting more frequent. Initially, it was subtle, shadows just beyond my peripheral vision, barely there and gone in an instant. Every time I tried to focus or investigate, the strange occurrences would stop. When the incidents became more regular, happening sometimes twice a day, I realized something was truly off. I tested different approaches, changing room lighting, closing curtains, turning on extra lamps. Nothing seemed to make a difference. My technology started acting strangely too. Phone apps would freeze near windows, screens would flicker unpredictably, and camera functions would fail. One evening, while preparing for bed, something truly unsettling happened. Standing in the shadows under a tree outside my bedroom window was a dark shape, darker than the night itself, like a silhouette that absorbed light. When I blinked, it vanished completely. I tried photographing it one night, but the camera showed only static. I researched the building's history online, hoping for some explanation. But everything seemed normal. No strange reports existed, and the neighbors were friendly but private. No one ever mentioned anything unusual. The encounters continued, always in late afternoon or evening. I began keeping a journal to track these experiences. Something was consistently watching me, though I couldn't explain what. When I discussed these events with others, their suggestions about sleep paralysis or lighting anomalies never felt right. Then one night, the shape appeared differently. Instead of quickly disappearing, it lingered at the edge of my vision. The air felt heavy and cold, pressing down on me. Goosebumps covered my arms as I sat motionless, heart racing. After what seemed like an eternity, the shape dissolved, drifting away like smoke in a gentle breeze. I shared my experiences with Clara during one of her visits, but her joking comments about ghosts didn't help. We quickly changed the subject, yet the feeling of being watched never left me. Weeks of tension had been building. Something was watching me. I'd scanned my home, searching every nook and cranny, but the feeling persisted. Broken branches littered the ground beneath my window, yet no footprints betrayed an intruder's presence. My doctor assured me I was fine, but exhaustion consumed me. I tried everything: new curtains, bright bulbs, rearranging furniture. Nothing stopped the unsettling presence. Then one evening, everything changed. I searched every corner, and suddenly the shape was gone. Relief washed over me. That night, I slept with windows open and lights off. The air felt fresh and clean. At 3 a.m., a soft tapping woke me. My heart raced as I sat up, but saw nothing, just an empty street and quiet trees. Since then, the shape appears less frequently. Sometimes, I catch a fleeting glimpse in my peripheral vision, but it doesn't stay. The feeling of being watched has diminished. I still don't understand what it was or why it was there. It never attempted to harm me or communicate. It simply watched and faded away. It all started on a typical evening in Fairbanks. Around 7 p.m., I was wrapping up a frozen pizza when the lights flickered and vanished. Complete darkness. No warning, no buzzing transformers. I figured it was another power issue. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped outside. The street was pitch black, illuminated only by moonlight through thin clouds. No street lights, no headlights, just the usual stillness. Then something caught my eye. A bright, perfectly spherical light hovering about 30 feet above the road. This wasn't a typical light. A steady, white-blue glow breathed life into the darkness below. I initially thought it might be a drone or spotlight, but everything remained dark and silent. No drone hum, no engines, not even the familiar buzz of electricity, just this motionless, silent light. I pulled on my jacket and stepped onto the porch, flashlight and phone in hand. Attempting to call someone, I realized there was no signal. Just silence and that otherworldly glow. My first spring working with the Arctic Wildlife Study team was memorable. And not just because of our research. We were camped on a remote stretch of tundra near the Brooks Range, miles from any civilization. Early May still meant long, cold nights and frozen landscapes with low shrubs peeking through patches of snow. That particular night, I was on watch outside our tent cluster, sipping coffee from my thermos while the rest of the team wound down inside. The sky was crystal clear, stars bright but distant, and the air completely motionless. No breeze stirred the landscape. As I scanned the snowy terrain, something caught my eye. A low, bright object hovering about 50 feet from camp. This wasn't like any aircraft I'd seen before. It was an unnatural white glow, brighter than a flashlight but without that harsh beam, illuminating the snow around it with an eerily even light. Suddenly, the camp's electronics went dead. The porch light wouldn't turn on, and nearby devices were completely silent. My digital watch stopped ticking. When I shined my flashlight at the orb, it didn't respond normally, but shifted slightly left, almost as if acknowledging my presence. I backed onto the lawn, transfixed by its glow. After what felt like 5 minutes, though time seemed distorted, the orb began to fade slowly. Its light dimmed to a faint shimmer and then vanished completely. The power remained out for a solid half hour. When lights finally flickered back on, everything snapped to life. The microwave clock reset, my phone signal returned, and even the car key fob beeped normally. Standing on the porch, I felt I'd witnessed something impossible. No fireflies, drones, or planes could explain what I'd seen. Just that quiet, glowing sphere. The next day in town, people smiled and suggested it might have been a weather balloon or military test. But if that were true, why did all my electronics die? I'm Gabe Carlson, and to this day I've never seen anything like it again. The night was unnaturally quiet. A strange light hung in the distance, completely motionless. When I first noticed it, something felt immediately off. No sound, no movement, just a pure, suspended moment of stillness that seemed to pause the entire world. I stepped closer, my boots crunching softly against the snow. The light didn't react. It wasn't like a campfire or satellite tracker, nothing that made sense. At 1:13 a.m., with the camp dark and silent, I realized something was wrong. Everyone should have been inside, but the emptiness felt strange. Then, just like that, the light vanished. Gone in an instant, as if someone had flipped a switch. I tried calling out, but no one answered. Walking back toward the tents, my thoughts grew fuzzy. The air felt thick, my movements sluggish. Inside the tent, the team looked shocked. They said I'd been gone almost 2 hours, but I was certain only 10 minutes had passed. My watch was dead, frozen at 1:13, and incredibly everyone else's watches had stopped at exactly the same moment. Outside, we found a perfect 10-foot circle of crushed snow, pressed down as if something had landed. No footprints, no disturbance, just an unnaturally flat ring in the untouched landscape. Jessie, our biologist, said she felt like she'd been dreaming, but couldn't remember anything. We watched the spot for a day, but nothing changed. The strange circle remained as snow slowly settled around it. We packed up and headed back to Purdue Bay, the incident lingering in our minds. Now in Anchorage, I catch myself staring at my watch. The Tundra's long, silent nights feel different. As a fire lookout since childhood, I've seen many strange things, but nothing like this. I still can't explain what happened that night, a moment of unexplained stillness that continues to haunt me. My name is Jake Merrick, and this story stems from a summer working fire watch near Denali, stationed in an old wooden tower perched on a ridge with an expansive wilderness view. The job was simple: watch for fires, report dangers, and pass time reading or napping. But late July that year was anything but ordinary. Just after midnight on the second night, something unusual began. While scanning the dark horizon with binoculars, strange lights caught my attention. These weren't typical aircraft lights. Instead, they were steady pale glows with a faint blue tint, moving smoothly across the sky like they were patrolling a deliberate route. They clustered and spread out in an inexplicable pattern. Communication became impossible. My radio produced only crackling static, and even the backup handheld emitted a low, humming buzz. Attempts to photograph these lights resulted in nothing more than fuzzy, indistinct blobs. The forest remained eerily silent except for a persistent electronic hiss. The dogs from nearby cabins reacted strangely, their barking low and growly, different from their usual alert sounds. It felt like they sensed something unnatural lurking just beyond perception. I began meticulously tracking everything, logging interference times, and noting the light's precise movements. They consistently drifted low over the tree line, moving west to east before vanishing with the sunrise. Initially, I assumed some weird atmospheric interference or equipment malfunction, but as days passed and the mysterious lights continued their strange dance across the night sky, I realized something genuinely unexplainable was happening. Midweek, during a routine walk from the tower to the helipad, everything changed. Behind the trees, a shape caught my eye, tall, slender, absolutely still but watching. The air around it shimmered like a heat mirage. When I called out, nothing responded. My flashlight revealed only empty space when I swept the beam across where the figure had been. Something was happening, but I couldn't explain what. The tower seemed isolated every night, disconnected from the world between midnight and dawn. Perhaps there are moments missing that I'll never get back. At first, the lights seemed to be a trick of the mind. Was it a deer moving in the shadows? But something didn't feel right. An unsettling sensation of being watched followed me back to the tower. After midnight, the radio interference began again. No matter what frequency I tried, I couldn't reach anyone. The lights appeared, drifting in their slow, predictable pattern. The forest had gone completely silent. No wind, no insects, just an eerie, deep stillness that seemed to suspend time itself. My watch showed nearly an hour, passing in what felt like mere minutes. When the lights faded into the grey sky, I felt disoriented. The next day, I called the ranger station from a nearby cabin's landline. They had no reports of strange lights or radio issues, seeming to think I was experiencing nothing more than bad weather or poor reception. My frustration grew. I knew what I'd experienced during those isolated nights. Night after night, I found myself drawn to the strange lights, feeling an eerie silence pressing in around me. It seemed like these unexplained phenomena were happening just for me, as if I was the only witness. On the final night of my vigil, I decided to stay awake until dawn, hoping to unravel the mystery. As hours crept by, the lights returned. The radio hummed with static, and distant dogs barked a soft, steady rhythm. One orb slowed, hovering almost directly above the tower. It pulsed faintly, almost like it was breathing. My hands trembled in the cold air as I watched intently. The light began to dim and dissolve. Just before vanishing, a soft, almost musical hum vibrated through the air, not loud, but enough to make my skin crawl. Suddenly the radio crackled to life, clear and crisp for a split second. I heard a voice calling my name. Instinctively, I reached for the mic, but the connection cut out as quickly as it had appeared. Silence rushed back in. Morning arrived with the forest's usual sounds, birds calling, wind rustling through the trees. The world seemed to reset as if the night's strange occurrences had been nothing more than a bad dream. I packed up and left the tower the next day. Back in town, everything felt louder, busier, and less mysterious. Yet, the memories lingered. Here's the rewritten version. An ordinary evening at Black Rock Cafe was about to become anything but normal. The sun dipped behind the ridge, casting a bruised purple sky over the old quarry, the same hue locals associated with strange lights. Rumors had been swirling all night about glowing orbs bouncing off limestone walls, but I hadn't paid much attention. That changed when John, a customer, leaned in and started talking about Miller's Pit. His story was chilling. Orange spheres hovering silently over a rock face, at least 15 feet wide, blinking out as quickly as they appeared. I nodded while steaming milk for his espresso, only half listening. The cafe was nearly empty. The zoned-out regular nursed a latte while John sat near the window. When the door chimed, everything shifted. A man in a crisp black suit walked in, no tie, shoes gleaming under the neon sign. His entrance was methodical. He didn't look at anyone, didn't even glance at the counter. Instead, he went directly to John's table and sat down. The fluorescent light seemed to dim slightly as the stranger settled in. John froze mid-drink, his expression tightening. No greeting was offered, no identification shown. The man's voice was mechanical when he asked, "Tell me about the lights." John stammered about orange lights, describing back roads, gravel cut-offs, and abandoned cabins. The stranger listened intently, nodding once when John finished. From behind the counter, I watched, my heart racing, half expecting the man to vanish into thin air. When John finished his drink, he pushed back his chair. "I've got to go," he said. The man's response was flat. "Be safe." John gave me a small, cryptic wave before hurrying out. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from John. When I looked up, the booth was empty. The suited man had disappeared without a trace, leaving only a faint scent behind. The lights, unnatural silence, and fleeting shapes in the trees continued to haunt me. I couldn't explain what I'd seen, and no one else seemed to have witnessed it. Perhaps that was the most unsettling part. Some parts of the wild are meant to be observed quietly from a distance, never fully understood. I drove home on Route 47, windows down despite the chill. A distant street lamp glowed weakly near the silent dark quarry to my right. The gravel access road tempted me, but I resisted the urge to chase ghost stories in the night. Back home, I switched on every light and checked my phone. John's text was the only message. I wondered about his recent experiences, my laptop booting up with a mechanical fan click that seemed too loud in the silence. Almost texting him, I hesitated, unsure what to say. Tea in hand at the kitchen table, I watched steam rise. Soft headlights passed outside, and for a moment, a dark shape caught my eye at the window. Just the neighbor's cat, I realized, my heart slowing. I pulled up the local news site. Municipal meetings, a high school band story, a missing cat. Nothing unusual. No mentions of lights, suits, or secret coffee shop meetings. Sleep evaded me. The alarm clock mocked me. 10:03 a.m., then 1:19. Every creak in the house sounded like footsteps on gravel. I lay awake until 3:30, half expecting a knock at the door. Morning light felt weak and pale. Brewing coffee, I stared at the empty street. The thought of calling John flickered through my mind. Maybe he'd seen the man again or experienced strange lights, but I didn't call. Instead, I poured coffee with too much cream, making it sweet. At 7:15, I left for my shift, taking the same route past the quarry. Headlights cut through the mist like knives. Pine trees loomed on both sides. No glow, no sign of anyone near the cut line. In the cafe parking lot, I took a deep breath before entering. The door chime rang as I set down my keys, forcing a smile for the morning rush. A few regulars sat at the counter. No suits, no staring. The neon sign flickered as the last regular left. The door clicked shut. My hands shook as I flipped the closed sign. Walking to the parking lot under the bruised sky, I half expected to see the man leaning against my car. Nothing. Just John's Prius, wrapped in fog at the curb. The neon sign hummed back to life. The espresso machine hissed as I wiped the bar top, wondering about the man in the fog. Beans dropped into the grinder as I handed a cappuccino to Marisol. She studied my face. "You okay? You look tired?" The morning hung grey and still, my camera at the ready as I scanned the empty landscape. Something felt off. I'd been tracking a missile launch at the White Sands test range, a routine assignment for a freelance aerospace journalist like myself. At 6:02 a.m., the alert horn had sounded, and I'd captured the bright flash and contrail cutting through low clouds. But it wasn't the launch that had my attention now. A lone figure in a dark suit stood near the service road, shoulders squared at attention, backlit by floodlights. No safety gear, just crisp clothing that seemed completely out of place in this desolate environment. I'd first spotted the person motionless near the fence and zoomed in, then ducked out to investigate. By the time I reached the area, the test crew had vanished, leaving only gravel and scattered parachute fragments behind. The mysterious figure was gone. I circled the perimeter, searching every shadowy corner. No footprints, no crushed grass, nothing. My heart racing, I tapped my radio. "Range control, this is Jensen. Do you have an observer at the south fence?" Silence answered me. Just as I started walking back, a soft click broke the quiet. I spun around. Later that evening, back at the cafe where I often grabbed coffee, memories of the morning's strange encounter lingered. The overhead lights felt harsh. Jazz played softly in the background. No one mentioned the missile launch or the suited stranger. It was as if the entire morning had been erased. A silent agreement to forget. As I drove home, my reflection in the rearview mirror showed dark eyes and a pale face. Headlights cut through the fog behind me. Something unresolved hung in the air, waiting to blur the lines between what I'd seen and what I'd been told. The flood lamp cast an eerie glow, and there he stood. A man in a black suit so crisp it seemed impossible. White shirt, narrow tie, shoes gleaming with an unnatural polish. His posture was rigid, like a mannequin carefully positioned. "Ma'am," he said with calm precision, "this area is off limits." I held up my press badge, Defense Tech Weekly. "I have permission for photos." He shook his head. "Permission revoked. Return to the bunker." His face remained blank, yet not hostile. I glanced at the clock. 6:15? Though only 10 minutes had passed, it felt much longer. I remembered seeing someone before, a dark suit at the fence. He checked his watch. "No, please, step away." I raised my camera, hoping for a quote. A slight smile crossed his lips as he shook his head. Some inexplicable sensation made the hair on my arms prickle. I lowered the camera and stepped back. He nodded, then glided, not walked into the shadows behind the service road, his shoes making no sound. I watched until he vanished completely. Returning to the bunker, my mind raced. The test crew was gone. Vans pulled away, the door locked, empty, completely empty. At 7 a.m., I drove to the main gate. The security guard looked puzzled. I showed my pass, but he informed me of a range closure. "You must have missed the memo," he said. I insisted there was no memo. He shrugged and punched in the gate code. Back on the highway, I reviewed the photos. Missile blasts appeared normal bright arcs cutting through cloud cover. But something caught my eye. A dark blur in every fence line shot, a shape like a standing figure, then vanishing. I zoomed in. The blur had fabric-like edges, but no discernible detail, disappearing in the next frame. At 8:15, I called my editor, my voice trembling as I described the man in black from under the flood lamp. She explained the range was locked down for hypersonic tests, meaning they'd scrub any sensitive photos. When I asked about the guy in the suit, she told me to run the launch pictures and file the rest as shelf stock. I sat in a diner half a mile from the base, stirring my coffee. My camera bag rested beside me. Through the windows, I scanned the highway and scrubbed pines. half expecting to see him standing there. Nothing. I left my card with the waitress and walked to my car. A sealed manila envelope lay on the passenger seat, stamped with the date 6/12. Inside an unmarked envelope, 2 tightly cropped fence line prints and a single slip of paper arrived with no explanation. I stashed the contents in the glove box and drove home, feeling like I'd just slipped out of a half-remembered dream. The highway stretched before me, yellow lines dissolving into dawn. I half expected to see that dark figure in my rearview mirror, rigid posture, black suit, unblinking eyes, but the road remained empty. Just before sunrise, I stepped out of the cabin. Pale slate blue sky hung low over pine trees, and Baxter, my mutt, trotted beside me. We'd walked this 2-mile national forest loop near Cedar Creek countless times, but something felt different that morning. The air was damp, as if rain had fallen overnight, and an unusual silence blanketed the forest. At a small brook, Baxter splashed through shallow water while I wrung out my shirt sleeve and took a drink. Then I noticed it. A break in the familiar landscape. A clearing, hidden just off the trail, caught my eye. Wet ground squished under my boots. As I pushed through branches, I emerged into a space about 20 feet wide, surrounded by half a dozen mature oaks and maples. Each tree bore an identical, deeply unsettling mark. From ground level to exactly 6 feet high, every trunk's bark had been stripped away with impossible precision. The exposed wood looked smooth and pale, carefully shaved clean. No rough edges, no bark fragments littered the ground. Just perfect horizontal lines encircling each trunk. Baxter hung back at the clearing's edge, hackles raised and whimpering, refusing to enter. I stepped closer to the nearest oak, running a finger along its surface. Cool and almost slick, with no sign of tool marks or cutting. No explanation made sense. A chill ran down my spine. I scanned the area carefully. No footprints marred the mud. No broken branches suggested human presence. My flashlight beam swept across untouched fallen leaves. Something felt deeply wrong. Realizing I had no phone signal, I clicked the device off. Circling the clearing, I confirmed the height was exactly the same on each tree. Deliberate and unnatural. Baxter pressed against my leg, sensing my growing unease. The silence was absolute. No birds chirped, and even the distant brook seemed muted. My flashlight swept across waving branches through low clouds, revealing nothing moving. No wind stirred. An overwhelming feeling of being watched took hold. The perfectly stripped bark caught my eye. Its crisp edge seemed unnatural. I memorized the details before hurrying back to the trail. As I left the clearing, normal sounds gradually returned. Leaves crunched underfoot. The forest seemed to exhale with relief at my departure. Inside the cabin, I felt safe. The door slammed shut behind me. Baxter's whine pierced the silence as his damp fur pressed against me. Sinking into a kitchen chair, I warmed my shaking hands around a cup of tea. Outside, fog wove between tree trunks. Did I imagine what happened? My chilled fingers suggested otherwise. I texted Aaron, my forestry friend. Ever seen bark stripped like this? Perfect bands. No tracks. No damage. No response came. Night closed in. I checked locks repeatedly, curtains drawn tight. Baxter shadowed me, his nose twitching at unseen corners. The ranger station never returned my voicemail. Dreams invaded my sleep. Trees with smooth white bands bent and stepped closer on invisible roots. Baxter's whimper woke me. He climbed onto the bed, watching the darkness with alert eyes. Morning brought clarity. With notebook and tape measure, I returned to the clearing. Sunrise cut through lingering fog, but the light band had vanished. A thin, papery bark now covered the wood, scabby and irregular. The 6 feet mark barely visible, worn by night's moisture. Light-colored flakes clung to roots, disintegrating at my touch. I documented everything. Leaves looked subtly changed, edges curled, colors paler near the tree line. Baxter refused to enter the clearing's center. I took photos, marked GPS coordinates, and backed away. The forest resumed its normal rhythm. Birds sang. A breeze rustled. At home, I sorted the images. My phone's first set showed dark trunks. The clearing's ring remained solid brown. The old point and shoot revealed something unexpected. Highway 50 cut through eastern Colorado's darkness like a black ribbon. With my car's engine humming steadily at 65, stars hung motionless against the navy sky, pinned like a frozen photograph. It was late August, around 1:45 a.m., and the night air felt crisp at about 55 deg. Windows cracked open. I'd been counting constellations, searching for Orion's belt. Something felt off. I'd driven maybe 20 miles, but the stars hadn't shifted. Cassiopeia's familiar curve remained fixed, the Big Dipper unchanged. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I'd dozed off. The horizon, just grassland and scattered scrub oaks, should have been moving relative to the stars. Instead, everything remained locked in place, like a static image behind my windshield. My heart raced. I keyed the CB mic on channel 19. Anybody out there? Static was my only response. The hissing filled the car's silence. I gripped the wheel, driving another 5 miles, trying to shake off my growing unease. Weeks earlier, a hiking trip with Baxter had left me unsettled. One photo from that day stood out. Baxter sniffing near some cut tree edges. In the top right corner, a faint out-of-focus swirl shimmered like lens condensation. Zooming in revealed nothing. No shape, no color, just a blur invisible in the live view. I'd returned to that trail twice since. Each time the ground looked normal. No 6-foot rings, no bark fragments, no odd fog patches. Baxter stayed close, ears forward, sniffing branches without whining. The photos remain on my desk. Sometimes I study the close-up of Baxter in the clearing, staring at that faint sky swirl. I still don't know what stripped those trees or why Baxter refused to cross that line. I can't explain why the bark seemed to regrow overnight, but I remember the hush of that circle, how the air bent around it, and how I fled without casting a single fishing line into my morning calm. The pale rings were slightly askew. Something was waiting. Something had changed. I pulled out my phone to check the GPS, but the signal was weak. I drove east, pulling back onto the highway after backing slowly off the turnout, watching the puddle's reflection in the rear view as stars traced their arc. 3 stars of Orion seemed to glide westward across a mirrored surface, yet the actual sky remained perfectly still. A shallow puddle in a drainage ditch reflected this strange celestial movement, each star shifting position against a frozen backdrop. I pressed my fingertip into the water, creating a ripple that momentarily disrupted the reflection. When the surface calmed, the stars reformed in new positions, continuing their silent march. The weekend had begun like any other camping trip. Alina and I had driven deep into the Cascades, seeking quiet away from technology's constant hum. Early September balanced perfectly between summer's warmth and fall's crisp edge. We discovered a secluded clearing surrounded by towering fir and cedar trees, their branches weaving a dense protective canopy. Now stranded on a deserted road just past milepost 213, I leaned against the car hood. The engine was silent, headlights extinguished. Darkness enveloped me like thick velvet, punctuated only by distant cricket sounds. My phone showed no signal. I stared upward, feeling an unsettling weight in my chest. A cold breeze drifted across the plains, rustling grass. Every celestial fixture remained exactly in place. I waited. 1 minute, then 2. I shone my phone's flashlight on the water. Yes, the stars were mirrored there, but they moved. Slowly, almost imperceptibly. The sky and its inverted twin had decoupled. One stood motionless while the other moved on its own schedule. When I closed my eyes, an internal image of moving stars hovered in my mind. Opening them revealed a sky as steady as a photograph. I scanned the horizon. No lights, no shapes, just a silent prairie beneath a frozen sky. When the light began to fade in those late September white mountains, Elena and I had already set up camp. It was 2022, and I'd taken some time off work for a less traveled hiking route. We were comfortable in our routine. I gathered firewood while Elena unpacked the cooler, our movements steady and unhurried. As evening settled, we prepared a simple meal of sausages over the fire. Flames danced across the ground, casting shadows against tree bases. We sat close, our backs against cool tree trunks. Elena hummed softly, absently poking the fire with a stick. Something felt different about the woods that night. The forest held an unusual stillness, so profound you strained to hear anything. Then it happened. A whisper of my name. Just Jason, soft and clear, carried on the faintest breeze from about 50 feet beyond the tree line. No echo, no repetition. We looked at each other. I asked Elena if she'd heard it. She nodded silently. We scanned the shadows between trees, but saw nothing. No movement, no glowing eyes, just darkness. We called out, thinking maybe another camper was nearby. No response came, and the whisper came again. The drive home felt surreal. Headlights cut through darkness, the engine's steady hum a comfort. Around milepost 208, my phone found a single bar of signal. I considered calling someone, but what would I say? By the time I reached Lemon, The sky was changing. Stars that seemed fixed were now creeping westward. I pulled into a 24-hour diner parking lot, engine idling, watching. The earlier puddle reflection was gone, replaced by dry gravel. As dawn approached, I drove home in silence. Pulling into my driveway, I sat in the pastel light, wondering about the boundary between reality and something else. We'd been in those woods for almost 3 hours when everything began to shift. I'm Emma Collins, and I usually spend my weekends hiking, especially in fall when the leaves turn. That year, I'd chosen a less traveled path. Elena was with me, and we both heard something we couldn't explain. Here's the rewritten version. The morning light filtered softly through Franconia Notch State Park's treetops, casting a cool autumn glow across the trail. I was hiking a 3-mile loop, surrounded by the familiar sounds of woodland life, bird calls, rustling creatures, and my boots crunching dry leaves. About an hour into my walk, I stopped by a small stream clearing to drink water. Half hidden under fallen leaves and twigs, a stone caught my eye. It was perfectly circular, smooth as a hockey puck, with a glassy yet matte surface more uniform than any river stone. When I picked it up, an unexpected faint vibration rippled through my palm. Another time, something entirely different unfolded. Jason and Elena's names were whispered softly, as if someone leaned in close. But no one was there. Their skin prickled. Sitting motionless, they scanned the tree line, bewildered by voices that seemed impossibly near, yet sourceless. The campfire crackled faintly. At 9:13 p.m., Jason checked his phone. Predictably, no signal. They decided to pack up, thinking it might be a prank or an animal making strange noises. The moment they zipped the tent and stood, the whispering abruptly stopped. Their walkout was silent, only boot steps breaking the forest stillness. Jason kept glancing back, half expecting something to follow. When they reached the parking area, tension dissolved into nervous laughter. Elena remarked on the strangeness. Jason agreed, but those whispers haunted his thoughts. The entire journey home carried an unsettling feeling, like being watched by something unseen. It wasn't just hearing their names. Something fundamental had shifted in how the forest felt, how silence consumed every sound. Now, when night falls and he closes his eyes, those whispers return, faint enough to make him question their reality. He's not sure he'll return to that spot soon. The stone in my pocket hummed so softly it was more a sensation than a sound. Walking the empty trail, I could barely hear it, yet its presence was unmistakable. Every time I reached into my pocket, the quiet buzz was there, though I couldn't quite tell if it was real or just my imagination. Something felt strange. The trail markers seemed off, and the trees looked denser than before. I wasn't lost, but something had changed. Pulling out my phone, I noticed the weak GPS signal. Typical for these woods, the humming grew more pronounced, almost responsive to my surroundings. I made an odd discovery. The stone's hum intensified when I slowed down and faded when I walked faster, as if it was somehow alive and reacting to my movements. The forest was unnaturally silent. No leaves rustled, no birds chirped, no insects buzzed. An eerie stillness hung in the air, like the woods were holding their breath. Experimenting, I found an invisible boundary where the stone's behavior changed dramatically. When I stepped forward toward a sunlit bend in the trail, the humming stopped abruptly, as if someone had flipped a switch. Moving past a certain point made the stone go completely silent. Stepping back brought the low, steady hum rushing back. The trail ahead led into darker, more imposing trees. A subtle pressure from the stone seemed to urge me not to proceed. Unease crept over me. After a moment of hesitation, I turned back toward the clearing where I'd originally found the stone. As soon as I crossed that invisible line, the humming resumed. I quickened my pace, the stone tucked safely in my pocket. The forest felt different now. Shadows lingered unnaturally, and an unsettling sensation of being watched followed me. Just before dusk, I made it back to the parking lot, the mysterious stone still humming softly against my leg. It was just past midnight during a late spring night. The pasture was clear and cold, with moonlight spreading pale across the landscape. My usual field check was underway when something extraordinary caught my attention. The sheep were behaving in a way I'd never seen before. Typically, they would graze or wander in small groups, but tonight they stood frozen in an unnaturally tight circle, their heads raised and eyes fixed on a single point in the sky. I rubbed my eyes, thinking exhaustion might be playing tricks, but no. They were definitely focused on something unusual. A black blot hung against the moonlight, unlike anything I'd ever seen. It didn't reflect or shine, but seemed to absorb light like a hole in the sky. When I looked closer, I saw it was big and roughly rectangular, with blurry edges that appeared to shift and move in an indefinable way. Something felt profoundly wrong. My skin prickled with a cold, static-like sensation. A faint, low hum hung in the air, not like wind, but something entirely different. The sheep remained motionless. Even when I shifted or tried calling out, my voice sounded strange, muffled, and distant in the open field. A light pressure built in my head, like gentle fingers pressing against my temples. For a moment, the shape seemed to fold or split, though when I blinked, it was just a flat, dark mass blocking the stars. No light passed through it, and the moonlight stopped abruptly at its edges. I wanted to move closer, but my legs felt stiff. The silent boundary seemed to whisper a warning. Something had changed, and I knew right then I would never finish that hike. The night held its breath, and so did I. Part of me wanted to retreat to the house, but another part remained frozen, transfixed by this silent presence that seemed out of place. The wind had gone completely still. No crickets chirped, no distant dogs barked, no leaves rustled, just a deep silence punctuated by a sense of unknown anticipation. Later attempts to research the stone I picked up that night yielded nothing. No local legends, no geological matches. It sits in a box on my shelf now, silent and mysterious. The stone no longer hums, but I know what happened that day on the trail was real. Something extraordinary occurred, something I cannot explain. A faint hum vibrated through the night, barely audible. When I tried to take a picture, my phone went dead, its screen blacking out completely. The flashlight, which had been fully charged earlier, now refused to work. Stepping back toward the house, I glanced behind me. The sheep stood unnaturally still, their eyes fixed upward in an eerie, synchronized gaze. Inside, the house felt inexplicably cold. Through the window, I spotted a black sheep in the field, seeming to absorb moonlight as if it had devoured a section of the sky. Without warning, the sheep scattered, bolting toward the barn like something had terrified them. I rushed outside to investigate, but whatever had startled them had vanished. The field remained undisturbed, just damp grass and untouched soil. Over the next few days, I watched the field at night. The sheep would occasionally huddle together, staring skyward, quiet and motionless. They appeared to be waiting for something beyond my understanding. When I shared this experience with neighbors, they laughed it off as a dream or a joke. The local vet suggested animals might sense unusual weather, but the sky was clear and conditions completely normal. I couldn't explain what I'd witnessed. It wasn't a cloud, drone, or plane, nothing I'd ever encountered before. This mysterious shape simply sat there, absorbing moonlight, watching us while the sheep stared as if they comprehended something I couldn't. Since that night, I'm always scanning the sky during late evenings. I haven't seen anything similar again. But sometimes when the sheep fall silent in the middle of the night, I find myself looking out the window, wondering if that dark presence might return. The flight was routine. A quick paperwork delivery from Reno to Las Vegas, cruising at 7,500 feet in my Cessna 182. The autopilot was engaged, instruments steady, and the radio hummed with occasional check-ins from flight control. About 40 minutes into the journey, something unusual caught my eye near the right wingtip. At first, I thought it might be a reflection. The sun hit the wing at a sharp angle, potentially creating a misleading glare. But this was no typical optical illusion. A smooth, mirror-like object caught my attention, hovering about 100 feet off my right wing. I leaned forward, adjusting my sunglasses for a better look. No larger than a small car, the object was completely featureless. Just a reflective surface mirroring the sky and wing with impossible precision. My instruments showed everything was normal. Altimeter, steady, airspeed consistent, no unexpected turbulence. My heart raced, not from fear, but pure amazement. In all my years of flying, I'd never seen anything like this. I reached for the radio, scanning for any reports in the area. Silence. No chatter, no traffic updates. The transponder on code 1200 for visual flight revealed nothing. No blips anywhere near me. I pulled back the throttle slightly, watching the object maintain its exact position at my wingtip. It didn't move. Instead, it stayed perfectly positioned, matching my speed and heading as if locked in place. When I turned slightly left to test its response, the object mirrored my moves with flawless precision. I tried filming with my phone through the side window, but the reflection and speed made the image a useless blur. The object hovered silently beside me, no engine noise, no lights, no vibrations, just this smooth, mirror-like shape reflecting the sky. I radioed flight control. Control, this is N123DP. Do you have any traffic in my vicinity? Nothing. The onboard radar scope was completely blank. No targets within a 20-mile radius. My mind raced through explanations. Too big and smooth to be a drone. Not like a weather balloon, which doesn't hover or match speed this way. The sky was crystal clear, the object incredibly well defined. For several minutes, it remained motionless. Then, after about 7 minutes, it slowly pulled away from my wingtip. A brief shimmer, and then it vanished into the distance, as if it had never existed. The cold Montana morning was still, with a fresh inch of powder coating everything after a recent cold front. My name's Carson Hale, and these woods are familiar territory. Something felt different from the start. Parking at the edge of a clearing on Forest Road 611, I dropped my pack and breathed in the sharp pine-scented air. At first light, I found the tracks. A deer's steady walk, 2 front and 2 back hooves, leaving a clear path. Carefully, I followed into the pines, avoiding any noise that might break the morning silence. Overhead, snow-laden branches arched like a canopy, with early sunlight filtering through and illuminating tree trunks like golden lanterns. My watch read 7:12 a.m. and my phone stayed off. In cold country, distractions are the last thing you want. Bird songs faded as I moved through a stand of young firs, and suddenly the forest went completely quiet. No wind, no birds, just the sound of my own breathing. Scanning the landscape, I expected to see a buck or coyote, but nothing moved. A small depression in the snow caught my eye, a shallow bowl as if something heavy had rested there. I shrugged and continued. The deer tracks led downhill to a frozen creek bed with glazed clear ice. My gaiters snapped against the snow as I followed the prints. They dipped onto the ice, slid forward slightly, then continued without hesitation. I double-checked everything. My instruments and plane felt normal. No warning lights, no system faults. When I landed in Las Vegas, I immediately investigated. The FAA traffic log showed nothing unusual. The tower controller confirmed no reported incidents. I shared the story with my fellow crew members, but most dismissed it as a trick of the light or my imagination. Yet something nagged at me, how clear and solid it had looked, how the compasses and instruments remained unaffected. Driving home that night, I noticed a subtle hum in the car's stereo system, not from the speakers, but underneath. When I turned everything off, the sound disappeared. In the days that followed, I repeatedly checked my flight log and plane instruments. No errors. But late at night, when I glanced at the wingtip, I sensed that strange presence again. Something watching just out of sight. It was the only time I've ever encountered something so clearly out of place in the sky, yet which left no trace except in my memory. As I moved across the wide meadow, the landscape unfolded in stark white stillness. Wind-curd snow and hard crust patches mixed with bare grass beneath my feet. Near a cluster of rocks, ravens had left their droppings scattered across the white ground. No fresh pellets or feathers disturbed the eerie calm. Almost instinctively, I unzipped my jacket for an extra layer, though I wasn't feeling cold. Halfway across the field, something caught my attention. A second set of tracks overlapped the deer's. Men's hunting boots, size 10, pointing in the same direction. Whoever was following seemed to be trailing, not chasing. Their steps were slow and deliberate, matching the deer's path with an unsettling precision. The silence was absolute. No crows called. No wind stirred. Even the snow beneath my boots seemed muted, as if the air itself was dense and heavy. I moved carefully, my footsteps crunching softly. The tracks ahead were clear and purposeful, cutting a straight line across the meadow's center. Raising my binoculars, I scanned the landscape. Nothing moved. No figures. No disturbance along the tree line. About 80 yards ahead, the tracks simply ended where the ground sloped gently toward a hidden ravine. I crouched and examined the snow closely. No return prints. No boot marks stumbling down the slope. No disturbed snow crystals. It was like someone had vanished into thin air. The deer's hoofprints merged with the mysterious boot prints at this point, then continued forward into the brush. I stood and tested the snow around the track's end. Firm crust. When I stepped, I sank an inch. Everywhere else gave 2 or 3 inches under my weight. The ground here felt stiff, holding my gloved hand an inch above the surface. I felt a sudden draft like a trapped mini-blizzard. Unease crept over me. My heart raced, but curiosity held me in place. I searched for any sign, twig breaks, cloth scraps, nothing. I lifted snow to check the grass underneath. untouched. Something was wrong. I should have left, but something kept me rooted. I marked the GPS coordinates. 48291 Degain 114.498 DW. The horizon showed only pines to the north, a hill to the south. The world was a blank white canvas. No cabin lights, no road sounds, pure silence. I tied a cloth strip high on a nearby tree to mark the spot. It snapped sharply in the windless air, the sound piercing the stillness. I'd been tracking deer since sunrise. Following a set of prints that turned startlingly loud, they curved south along the meadow's edge, then vanished into dense woods. My stomach tightened. Losing the deer wasn't the problem. Returning to the forest alone felt wrong. The open field seemed too empty, as if something watched from the tree line. Dread spread slowly, like ice creeping under my collar. I followed the tracks out of the meadow, every sense on high alert. The forest awakened around me. Woodpeckers tapped, chickadees chattered overhead. My breath hung visible in the cold air as I snapped a branch, testing my gun's zero. Nothing seemed out of place, but something felt off. Those tracks ended too cleanly, too intentionally. No explanation made sense. I moved downhill toward the creek, heart racing faster than I wanted to admit. By 9:10 a.m., nearly 2 hours into my trek, my legs felt rubbery. At the tree line, I dropped my pack on the log from earlier. One last look at the meadow revealed nothing, no flags, no footprints, just unbroken white snow. The parking lot remained as empty as when I'd arrived. I tossed my shotgun and pack into the truck, sat down and closed my eyes. The engine idled, heater warming the cab. Silence surrounded me on the drive home. Inside the house, heat felt overwhelming. My phone pinged, my wife asking about breakfast. "Yes, just give me 15, I replied. I hung my coat and boots, washed my gloves in the sink, and tossed a cloth scrap into the trash. Morning light flooded the living room as I stared out the window. The road remained empty. Hours passed, and I kept glancing outside, half expecting something to appear. But the snow lay untouched. I pulled out my map, plotted the GPS point, zooming in to study the contour lines. Then I closed the map and sat back, listening to the house settle as wind howled outside. These prints still haunt me. I know the woods can hide countless secrets, animals, people, echoes of forgotten footsteps, but footprints ending in open snow with no return. I've spent my life tracking game, navigating wild places, yet nothing explains that empty field. Something doesn't add up. The forest was silent that morning, save for the soft rattle of pine needles in the breeze. I'm Carl Jensen, a state wildlife tracker, and this experience continues to puzzle me. I've been a forestry worker for years, and something happened that defies explanation. My daily routine involves monitoring tree health, checking for diseases, and setting up environmental sensors. That particular morning, I was working in a section of ponderosa pines near Flagstaff, Arizona, an area closed off due to wildfire risks. The mountain air was cool and clear, creating an atmosphere of sharp stillness. Around 9 a.m., a low, deep hum disrupted the silence. It wasn't like any machine sound I'd ever encountered. Steady, almost resembling a distant idling engine, yet no equipment was visible. The sound seemed to originate from just beyond a cluster of trees, about 50 yards away. Then I saw it. A smooth, dark shape slipped between tree trunks, not an object with definable edges, but a black mass that was almost reflective in the scattered sunlight. It moved with an unnatural fluid grace, gliding silently before disappearing behind a thick stand of pines as quickly as it had appeared. The forest felt fundamentally altered afterward. Bird calls and wind sounds were muted, as if everything was holding its breath. Part of me wanted to investigate, but another part warned me to stay put. I shook off the feeling and continued working. That winter, I was staying in a small, converted woodshed behind a farmhouse in northern Vermont, just outside Glover. After everything fell apart in Boston, I needed a cheap, quiet place, just one room with a cot, a heater, and a desk. My backyard astronomy hobby had been keeping me focused, tracking starfields, meteor showers, and occasional satellite flares. By lunchtime, I was back at the ranger station. The break room was quiet when a man walked in, clean-shaven, with short black hair slicked back, wearing a uniform without identifying patches or logos. He seemed out of place, definitely not someone who belonged. I haven't returned to that forest spot yet. Maybe I will someday. Or maybe some tracks are better left covered, some stories untold. The forest had an unsettling quality that I couldn't quite define. My telescope setup was modest. A used 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain mounted on a skywatcher, positioned on a plywood platform behind my cabin. The location was perfect. far from town's light pollution, with winter nights offering crystal clear skies I'd never experienced before. That Tuesday night felt special. I had just received approval to work remotely for a Portland graphic design firm and celebrated with a simple beer and grilled cheese. Around 1:30 a.m., while studying the Orion Nebula, something unusual caught my attention. A star to the northeast, one I'd seen countless times before, suddenly blinked. This wasn't a typical atmospheric distortion. It was a hard, definitive blink. Gone, then back. The pattern was bizarre. 3 quick flashes, a long pause, 2 more flashes, then silence. I spent the next hour meticulously tracking the star, checking everything. I swapped eyepieces, verified my power source, and reviewed my notes. Nothing explained what I'd witnessed. Eventually, I logged the incident and dismissed it as fatigue. Earlier that week, a strange encounter had left me unsettled. During my forestry work, a mysterious man had approached my equipment. He studied my GPS handheld weather meter and various measuring tools with an intense focus. In a quiet but firm voice, he asked about equipment calibration, wanting to know if my instruments were within acceptable parameters. I hesitated, responding that everything seemed fine. He leaned in and cryptically mentioned that accuracy was crucial, warning that deviations could lead to unintended consequences. Before I could ask what he meant, he stood and left the room. When I turned back, he had vanished completely. The rest of the afternoon felt off. My GPS showed strange position jumps, as if I'd moved dozens of feet in an instant. The weather meter fluctuated erratically, and that deep, faint hum returned from beyond the tree line. On my way back to the truck, I caught another glimpse of a dark shape sitting motionless on a rock, almost camouflaged in the shadows. The moment our eyes met, it disappeared into the trees. I didn't mention the encounter to my fellow workers. I wasn't even sure what to think myself. Since that day, strange lights have flickered between the pines at night. The low hum sometimes returns, even when no equipment is running. I can't help wondering if the man was warning me or checking on something I wasn't supposed to see. One thing is certain. This forest is far from ordinary. Around 2 a.m., I was half dozing at my desk, waiting for cloud cover to clear when something caught my eye through the curtain. A tall, extremely thin man stood motionless just beyond the tree line, about 30 feet away. His skin looked almost bluish in the moonlight, and he wore a black overcoat and dark slacks. What struck me was his equipment, a black telescope on a matching matte black tripod with no visible markings. This wasn't my telescope. At first I thought someone might be playing a prank, but something felt different. The snow that had fallen that afternoon was at least 2 inches deep, yet the ground around him remained perfectly undisturbed. For 10 minutes I watched him stand completely still, eyes fixed to the eyepiece, without moving. No adjustments, no note-taking, just intense, unbroken focus. Unsure how to react, I closed the blackout panel and sat on the floor. Calling the police seemed ridiculous. What would I even say? When I looked again before dawn, he remained in the exact same position. By sunrise, he had vanished. No tracks, no telescope, no evidence he'd ever been there. 2 days later, a strange discovery appeared. Taped to the observatory window was a piece of black paper, bookmark-sized, with a perfect white circle, centered precisely. There were no tape edges, no moisture damage, despite the snow. It hadn't been there when I went to bed. By noon, it was gone. No wind, no footprints. The following week brought increasingly odd occurrences. Cabin power flickered continuously without fully cutting out. My telescope mount began drifting slightly off alignment, resisting every recalibration attempt. One night I found the scope inexplicably pointed toward the woods, though I hadn't touched it. Then came the whispering. Not voices exactly, but a mechanical hum at such a low frequency. I couldn't determine if it was in the air or inside my head. It only happened at night, and my recordings always came out blank. Another night I heard slow, deliberate footsteps crunching through the snow around the cabin, circling but never approaching. I killed the lights and waited. Nothing. That's when sleep became impossible. I moved the telescope inside, locked the window, sealed the blackout panel from within, and started keeping a knife by the bed. I've spent years as a wildlife photographer, mostly doing freelance work on small assignments or personal projects. My cabin sits miles from the nearest town, with a wide, slow river running through the northern Minnesota woods behind it. One late summer evening, the sky faded to an orange-gray light that photographers know can be challenging, but potentially rewarding. I was sitting on a fallen log near the water's edge, camera mounted on a tripod, capturing images of birds landing on branches and a beaver swimming by. When I later started unloading the photos, something strange caught my eye. In several shots, dark, Irregular shapes floated just beneath the river's surface. These weren't like rocks or logs. They were smooth, matte, almost like shadows, but more solid. Strangely, they remained unchanged between frames, even as the water moved around them. I initially dismissed it as a camera glitch and deleted the shots. The next day, I returned to the same spot at the same time. The shapes appeared again. I zoomed in and tried different angles, but they remained constant, just below the surface, unmoving and distinctly odd. When I mentioned this to a friend, he joked about river spirits, but something felt off. This wasn't the first strange occurrence. Months earlier, I'd been stargazing with my telescope on a clear, moonless night. After waiting 15 to 20 minutes, the stars suddenly reappeared. Same positions, same brightness, as if they'd never vanished. The morning after that night, I packed everything into my truck and left before sunrise, not even saying goodbye to the farmhouse owners. 2 nights later, while editing photos on my porch, surrounded by the quiet woods, with crickets chirping softly and the river's gentle rush, an unexpected car crunched up the gravel driveway. The isolation made such a visit highly unusual. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. On my final night, the stars simply disappeared. Not obscured by clouds, just gone. Around 11 p.m., I stepped outside to check the satellite dish after a dropped connection, and the sky was different. A car pulled up outside my cabin, its model unfamiliar and unexpected given the late hour. That was a year ago, and I haven't used the telescope since. The late October evening was cool and damp as I drove home from work through New Richmond's outskirts, the sky mostly clear. Earlier that day, I had been photographing the river, capturing something unusual beneath its seemingly ordinary surface. When he arrived, his presence was jarring. A black suit without a tie, crisp white shirt, and polished shoes seemed out of place on my quiet porch. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice barely steady. His smile held no warmth. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said, "but I'm interested in some photos you've taken." Confusion swept over me. What photos? Before I could react, he pulled out a small notebook and swiftly removed the SD card from my camera. "Please put that back," I insisted. He turned the card over thoughtfully, then spoke quietly. "Water keeps its own secrets. Sometimes those secrets aren't meant to be uncovered." A chill ran down my spine despite the warm air. "Who are you?" I asked. After a moment, he replied, "Just someone who wants to help you avoid trouble." The porch light flickered, and the surrounding woods seemed to darken unnaturally. Without further discussion, he returned the card to my camera and handed it back. As quickly as he'd arrived, he got in his car and drove away. I locked the door and sat down, the camera still warm in my hands. The thought of calling the police crossed my mind, but what would I say? A strange encounter with no clear threat. The next day, I returned to the river, determined to understand the mysterious shapes. The water appeared normal, clear, and slow. But when I looked through my camera's viewfinder, those same shapes emerged. Lurking just beneath the surface, I captured more images and later that night examined them closely on my laptop. As I zoomed in, the details became increasingly unsettling. I was driving along a quiet road near the local power plant as evening settled in. Just after 7 p.m., something felt different. The air carried a mix of familiar and strange scents, ozone, burning coal, and an unfamiliar metallic sharpness. I'd traveled this stretch countless times before, but that night was unlike any other. Odd lights hovered over the power plant, not the usual work lights or warning beacons. These were smaller, brighter, and arranged in a pattern that defied explanation. They moved deliberately, almost like they were surveying or scanning the facility. I pulled over, watching intently. The shapes seemed solid yet dark, with no reflection or texture, just unnatural forms that didn't belong. Soon, other strange occurrences began to accumulate. At night, when checking the perimeter, I'd catch fleeting movements between the trees, always too quick to identify. My phone would inexplicably die when trying to call or text. The river began to change too. At dusk, it would emit a low, vibrational hum near the area where I'd been taking photographs. I shared these experiences with a few friends, but they dismissed them as stress-induced imagination. But I knew something had shifted. The man's words echoed in my mind. Water keeps its own secrets. The shapes remained in my photos, always just below the surface like silent watchers. Sometimes when the wind was still and the river moved quietly, I could feel something observing me from the trees. Yet when I turned, only shadows remained. I keep thinking about that man in black and his warning about leaving some things undisturbed. I'm not certain what the river is concealing, but I'm convinced it's not natural. I'm writing this in hopes that someone else might understand. Perhaps there are things watching the quiet, forgotten places. Some secrets might be alive, and they certainly don't want to be discovered. I haven't returned to the river after dark since that night. Whatever was there continues to haunt the edges of my memory, a persistent reminder that some mysteries are better left unexplored. The power plant had always been a mysterious place, but tonight something felt different. The lights I saw moved with purpose, not like a random occurrence, but more like a deliberate signal. As I tried to capture the moment on my phone, the screen glitched and flickered, forcing me to put it away. I watched as the strange lights drifted slowly around the plant's perimeter before vanishing behind a cooling tower. Then, without warning, a car pulled up behind me, dark, quiet, with no headlights. A man in a crisp, dark suit that seemed out of place appeared in the roll-down window. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, with slicked-back black hair, he greeted me with a professional, emotionless evening. When I responded and asked if he worked at the plant, he simply stated he was from downtown on Main Street. Another car arrived, bringing a second man who looked almost identical. Pale skin, black suit, appearing as if sunlight was a foreign concept. The questioning began immediately. What time did I see the lights? About 7:10, heading home from work. Where were they? Hovering over the northern cooling towers, staying for maybe 5 minutes before moving behind the towers and disappearing. The men listened intently, hands folded calmly. They asked about workers or maintenance crews, but I confirmed there was nothing, just those unexplained lights. When the first man requested to see my phone, I refused. His lack of pressure only increased my unease. Something wasn't right. These weren't ordinary encounters, and the men made it clear they wanted absolute silence about what had occurred. A blurred government-like ID emerged, adding another layer of mystery. "Thank you for your cooperation," the first man said flatly, "and your discretion." Their cars, without visible license plates, disappeared as quickly as they had arrived, the second car leading, then the first. Silence returned, but an unsettling feeling remained. The sensation of being watched lingered, making my skin crawl. Later, when I told Mark about the incident, I knew this was far from an ordinary evening near the power plant. I worked the late shift at the old radio tower on the edge of Millbrook, a small town in upstate New York. It was early November, and the night had settled in heavy and quiet, with a cold fog rolling in from the river just a mile away. The tower wasn't much, just a rusty metal structure with a cramped room at the top, where I managed local emergency broadcasts for a handful of nearby communities. That night started like any other. I arrived around 9 p.m., grabbed my jacket, and climbed the spiral staircase to the broadcast room. Fog had thickened since dusk, and the windows were already streaked with condensation. Absolute silence surrounded me, broken only by the soft hum of equipment and occasional beeps from the transmitter. Around midnight, while doing routine checks, the radio began to crackle with static. At first it seemed normal, just interference from weather or a weak, distant signal, but then the static grew louder, as if someone was forcefully pushing through with their own signal. It wasn't a recognizable code or message, just a low, drawn-out hiss that felt wrong. I adjusted the dials, trying to clear the sound, but the static remained, filling the room with an eerie white noise. In the weeks that followed, strange things started happening. My phone began acting weird, dropping calls and messages without explanation. Once, driving past the plant in daylight, I spotted a black SUV near the gate. Windows tinted so dark it looked like a black hole. No one was inside. Nights became increasingly unsettling. Around 2 a.m., I thought I heard footsteps outside my apartment window. When I looked, nothing was there, but the street light flickered oddly, and that metallic smell returned. I started taking a longer route home, adding 20 minutes to my commute just to avoid that stretch of road. My friend was naturally skeptical about the encounter. Probably just some government agents or company security making sure you don't spread rumors, he suggested. But something didn't feel right. Weeks passed quietly until one late evening at the office. Nearly 10 p.m., the building was empty, except for me. I glanced out the window and glimpsed a dark figure in the street lamp's shadows. But when I looked again, nothing remained. I can't shake the memory of those lights, those men, and that mysterious badge I never fully saw. Something larger seems to be happening, something I'm not meant to understand. The fog was thick that night, filling every corner of the dimly lit room with an eerie static. I was at my station when something felt off, almost deliberate. The radio crackled with an unusual intensity, cutting through my attempts to transmit. When I leaned closer to the microphone, hoping to understand, I saw him. Outside the window, standing on the metal catwalk surrounding the tower, was a man dressed in a formal black suit and tie. His appearance was striking. Pale skin, slicked back hair, and an unnaturally smooth face. Unlike a normal person, he stood almost like a statue, with one stark exception, his hand raised, palm facing me, in a clear signal to stop. At first, I thought I might be imagining things. His eyes were fixed on me, though I couldn't tell if they were dark or reflecting the control panel's faint glow. When I tried to call out, the static suddenly rose, cutting off my voice in a harsh burst. It wasn't just interference. The radio seemed to be warning me, drowning my words with an overwhelming hiss. Heart racing, I pulled back from the microphone and grabbed my jacket. I watched as he turned and stepped off the catwalk into the fog, which swallowed him completely. For a long time, I sat listening to the static, the silence, and the tower's machinery humming. When the morning shift arrived, I shared my experience. The static, the mysterious figure, but no one believed me. They suggested fatigue or fog-induced hallucinations. This was just the beginning. Over the next few days, strange occurrences multiplied. My phone started acting odd, calls wouldn't connect, texts sent themselves blank, and sometimes the screen would flicker with static, even when powered off. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, feeling watched, whether outside or driving home in the darkness. Now I recognize I'm probably just an ordinary person who stumbled onto something strange that night. Sometimes I drive past the plant but never stop, and I've never mentioned what I saw to anyone else. Here's the rewritten version. I'm Mark Reynolds, 35, always drawn to Oregon's remote corners. Late October had turned cold and damp, and I'd planned this weekend hike for weeks, a chance to escape city noise and deadlines. My destination was a trail near an old Cold War radar station in the Cascades, a spot mostly forgotten, except by locals and occasional hikers like myself. As I set up camp just past the tree line where the radar installation once stood, the landscape was mostly ruins. Concrete foundations and rusted antenna pieces were the only reminders of what used to be. Around 7 p.m., a strange, low, deep hum caught my attention. It wasn't like any engine or animal sound I recognized, but a constant vibration that seemed to pulse through ground and air simultaneously. Curious, I grabbed my flashlight and moved toward the tree line's edge. That's when I noticed the lights, not ordinary ones, but small, pale bluish orbs gliding quietly beneath the trees. They flickered faintly, moving slowly in the shadows. Squinting into the dense forest, I struggled to count them or understand their origin. They didn't resemble people or any animals I knew. Later, the static began to worsen. My radio broadcasts would cut in and out, and sometimes, just before signing off, faint whispers seemed to drift through. Though I couldn't make out clear words, something made me pause. Parking my car in the tower's lot, I noticed a black sedan parked near the wood's edge. It was different from other vehicles around, too clean, too polished. As I approached, 2 men in dark suits stepped out, moving with calm purpose. One looked directly at me and gave a small nod. I stopped, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. You need to be... Some things are better left alone. Before I could respond, they got back into the car and drove away, leaving me standing in the cold, uncertain. A man I'd seen outside the window, his strange movement and cryptic warning lingered in my mind. I never saw him, or the 2 men again, but their presence remained. Each time I climbed the tower, an unsettling sensation of being watched took hold, as if the fog itself was anticipating something. Eventually, the static faded and broadcast normalized, yet the feeling persisted. Now, on certain nights when the wind is just right and thick fog rolls in, I swear I can hear that same soft, steady sound. The Adirondacks in early fall can be deceptively quiet. My hike through Panther Gorge, a remote trail promising solitude, was meant to be one last outdoor adventure before winter's arrival. The sky hung low and grey, casting a muted light across the landscape. About midway through my loop, I entered a narrow section where the trees grew dense and the path shrank to little more than a dirt track. Something felt off immediately. The usual forest sounds vanished. No birds, no rustling leaves, just absolute silence. I stopped, listening intently. Then a flash caught my eye. Brighter than a lightning bug, sharper than a camera's click. The forest seemed heavier, the air thicker. Back at my small rented cabin about 10 miles from the trailhead, I started noticing something odd. Every single night, precisely on the hour, a black sedan would drive past without any headlights. The first time I thought it might be a mistake or a technical issue. I even tried to flag it down with my flashlight, but the car showed no response. No brake lights, no signals, just a steady, unchanging pace. This continued for 3 consecutive nights. Each time the car would pass by my cabin at exactly the same time, moving at the same speed, always in complete darkness. The entire scenario felt surreal, like something from a strange movie. I checked for potential explanations, power outages, road issues, but everything else around seemed completely normal. Curious and slightly unnerved, I mentioned this to a local at a diner in town. His response was cryptic. When I described the car's behavior, no lights, precise timing, he just shrugged and said, "Around here, some folks keep an eye on that place. You never know." He didn't seem interested in elaborating. That same night, after the car's routine pass, I heard it again, that faint, distant hum. Standing by the window, I scanned the dark forest beyond the road, but saw nothing. The next day, I returned to the site during daylight, hoping to find some answers, but the area looked completely unremarkable. The hiss was creeping back through the radio, like a warning emerging from somewhere just beyond the trees. The forest seemed normal enough during my hike, with just the usual sounds of leaves rustling and birds calling in the distance. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary, but something had been nagging at me since that first night. My trek through the forest had been unsettling from the start. The trail was eerily quiet. No leaves crunched under my feet, no birds called out. The silence was so intense that every tiny sound felt magnified. A light flickered briefly just off the trail deep in the woods. I squinted into the shadows, but saw nothing. As the sun started to dip lower, I was eager to finish my hike before darkness fell. The trail opened into a small clearing near the road leading back to the parking area. That's when I noticed the car. A plain black sedan sat on the side of the road, engine running but without lights. The driver's window was down, revealing a man who looked completely ordinary. Mid-40s, clean-shaven, dark hair slicked back, wearing a black suit with an open white collar. He looked directly at me, his expression calm and unreadable. "You okay?" he asked in a low, clear voice. I mumbled that I was just finishing my hike, my voice sounding strange in the stillness. "The forest keeps its secrets. Respect them," he said. Something about his tone suggested this wasn't just a casual comment. When I returned to my campsite, something immediately struck me as odd. Several concrete slabs appeared freshly cracked, as if something substantial had recently pressed down on them. I photographed the damage, puzzled by what could have caused it. That night, an increasing sense of being watched prompted me to double-check every lock on the cabin's doors and windows. Just after midnight, a familiar low hum returned, more intense than before. It vibrated through the walls and floor, steady and unnerving. Looking outside, I spotted the black car again. This time it was parked across the street, engine off, lights extinguished. I watched, heart racing, as a dark-clothed figure emerged, standing perfectly still for a minute before returning to the vehicle. The car then drove away, still without lights. Sleep became impossible. The next morning I packed quickly and left, trying to rationalize the experience as a local prank or some odd surveillance. Yet the memories lingered. The mysterious hum, the lights beneath the trees, the silent car. Weeks have passed, and I haven't returned to that area. Sometimes late at night, I think I hear that low hum when the wind blows just right. I can't explain what happened, but I know what I experienced was real. The uncertainty haunts me still. I've worked a lot of odd jobs, but my time as a night janitor at a restricted Air Force site in Nevada from 2004 to 2006 was unlike anything else. Experiences from those years would make an earlier encounter in the forest seem almost ordinary by comparison. The job came through a private contractor who was incredibly selective. Background checks, polygraphs, and a tight security orientation were standard. Every week, we'd fly in and out of a small civilian airfield near Tonapah, staying on base 4 nights. No phones, no cameras, nothing that could transmit a signal. Most buildings looked completely ordinary. Offices, labs, hangars, with boring concrete walls and metal surfaces, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. The interesting stuff was always hidden, usually inside those hangars. We had assigned cleaning zones, trash collection, floor waxing, bathroom maintenance. Zones rotated weekly, but one building remained constant. Hangar 4C. You could see it from the Meshel patio, a squat left square structure built into red rock, windowless with a single east side door. Not exactly secret, just overlooked. An older janitor named Lewis gave me early advice. Don't stare at 4C. Don't ask about it. Don't go near it. I thought he was joking until he added, "It hums. I didn't believe him at first. But during my 3rd month working late one night behind the admin building, everything was eerily silent. No wind, no aircraft, nothing. Then I heard it. A faint, deep mechanical hum rising through the ground, like a power transformer under stress. People get weird when you talk about certain places. They think you're either making things up or losing your mind. I wasn't. I was just there to clean floors. Years earlier, there was another strange one. Someone had warned me, not as a casual comment, but a meaningful warning. Curious, I asked about a light I'd seen and the unusual silence. He shook his head slowly. Not everything is meant to be understood. Sometimes the best thing is to walk away. Before I could press further, he closed the window, started the engine, and slowly pulled away. The car turned onto the road and disappeared around a bend. I stood there feeling the cold creeping in, watching where the car had been. The strange silence remained with me even after I reached my car. Something about that moment didn't feel natural, but I wasn't sure I wanted to understand what had happened. Here's a rewritten version focusing on reorganizing the content. The base felt different that night. I was working a routine shift, counting supplies in a storage unit near 4C when the humming started. It wasn't just a sound, more like a heavy load with a strange vibration that seemed to tickle your ears. Metal shelving rattled as overhead lights flickered and died, plunging me into darkness. Only weak emergency exit signs remained. Lewis had warned me weeks earlier, don't linger near 4C. Some things in there have been running longer than this base has existed. Some things aren't ours. I'd thought he meant old tech or experimental engines, but something about how he spoke always stuck with me. The air system went silent. That deep hum was all I could hear. Approaching the complex's rockier back end, I followed the sound. Hangars stood silent as I moved closer to building 4C. No external lights, no vents, no wires, just solid matte black steel. The humming wasn't louder, but denser. I could feel it in my ankles. Standing 10 feet from the door, I noticed my breath fogging despite the warm mid-70s night. My fingers would tingle near its doorless entrance with just a card reader and keypad. I'd learned to keep my distance, aware of cameras watching from every angle. Then a new sound emerged. Breathing, not my own. Slow, steady inhalations, like something massive was drawing breath just beyond my perception. When I stepped outside, the sky looked wrong. Orion was twisted as if someone had mirrored the constellation. Weeks earlier, I'd seen another strange incident. A new hire stood near 4C at 2 a.m., hands pressed against the wall, seemingly listening. When I called out, he didn't respond. I had to tap his shoulder to break his trance. He looked pale, confused. The next week, he was gone. Just another unexplained reassignment. Walking back to the main path, I tried to stay calm. No alarms, no announcements, just silence and that persistent hum. The entire base was dark. No windows lit, no spotlights, no headlights. I never told anyone about what I'd experienced, not even Lewis. But that night, everything changed. I used to work as an air traffic controller at a small FAA center on the Oregon coast near Newport back in 2009. At 29, I was 4 years into the job. Night shifts were always quiet at the facility. My job at the air traffic control center was routine. Mostly cargo flights and occasional medevac runs to Portland. The center was minimal. Just one main radar display room, a communications console, and a few workstations. On most nights, it was just me and a supervisor, sometimes with a trainee. That particular night, Dan Holloway was with me. He'd been doing this job for almost 2 decades and wasn't much for conversation unless something needed attention. We weren't friends, but I trusted him. Dan was the type who either knew something definitively or said nothing at all. It was just past 2 a.m., and the skies were clear. The scope showed only a UPS flight heading south along the coast and a corporate jet near Boise. I was halfway through a crossword, sipping gas station coffee, when something caught my eye. A blip appeared in the top right corner of the radar, over open water. The return was tagged at 80,000 feet with no transponder. While not unheard of, military sometimes runs dark operations. This wasn't in any scheduled military corridors. He'd seen it too, just raising his eyebrows without a word. The air felt impossibly cold. I didn't hesitate. I walked straight to the janitor's brake trailer and sat in darkness until the lights came back on about 20 minutes later. The next morning, no one mentioned a thing. When I asked Lewis about it, he simply said, "You stayed out too long." Months later, I was reassigned to Facility 7B full-time. I didn't argue. It was farther from the ridge. I never saw 4C again. During my final debriefing in a stark white room without clocks, a nameless official told me, "You'll sign this and never talk about what you saw." I signed, but I hadn't really seen anything. Just heard a low hum that seemed to emanate from beneath the world, felt a cold that lingered on my skin long after I'd left. The radar screen had shown something impossible. A signal at 80,000 feet that dropped to sea level in less than a second. No gradual descent, just a complete vanish. That building is probably still there, locked and humming. Everything felt different that night. The radar showed something unusual, a ghost return that didn't behave like normal weather interference. It held steady, unnaturally so. Dan and I watched carefully. I noticed something strange happening. Suddenly, the return vanished completely, not at the grid's edge, but simply blinking out mid-screen, as if someone had flipped a switch. No trailing signal, no gradual descent. I pulled up the raw radar playback, hoping for a technical explanation. Nothing made sense. The raw return was precise. High-altitude appearance, brief hold, then an instant drop to sea level before disappearing entirely. A system diagnostic showed everything functioning normally. No errors, no drop pings. Against standard procedure, I printed the hard copy logs. Something felt off. Around 2 a.m., 2 unidentified men arrived. No uniforms, no recognizable vehicle. They entered using badge access, claiming to be contract IT support from Seattle. One went directly to the radar terminal, while the other requested system logs from Dan. When I asked who called them, Dan's response was simple: "Not us." They remained until just after 5 a.m. Upon leaving, the system had been completely rebooted. Hard drives were purged. Every radar sweep from 1 to 4 a.m. was overwritten. My printed logs vanished. Dan and I exchanged a meaningful look. He cut off my attempt to speak. "Don't," he said. We finished the shift normally. Logged a quiet night. No incidents. A week later, the manager called me in for a standard review. "Remember anything strange?" I replied, "No. Just a quiet night." They smiled, seemed satisfied. We were road tripping from Phoenix to Reno, hitting ghost towns, planning to hike Zion, maybe gamble for a night. Rachel was just another stopover, a tiny blip on the map we'd barely registered. The Moonlight Motor Inn looked like an old trailer from the 70s. 6 rooms faced a cracked lot, surrounded by endless desert. A dusty diner across the road seemed frozen in 1982. We rolled in around 6:30, just before sunset. Randy, the front desk guy with a white beard, handed us an actual key on a blue plastic tag. When we mentioned Reno, he nodded as if we'd announced an impossible journey. "You kids staying just one night? That's smart," he said, then paused and looked out the window. "Don't go wandering after dark," he added. I chuckled, thinking he meant coyotes or snakes. Megan didn't even hear him. We dropped our backpacks in the motel room. It was surprisingly clean-stained carpet, but fresh sheets. A small table, bulky TV, and humming mini fridge filled the space. Outside, the desert sky transformed into a brilliant orange as we walked to the diner. 2 truckers played cards in the back, while Patty Klein looped on the jukebox. Basic burgers, fries, and watery coffee sat before us. The waitress smiled that weird smile, her eyes not matching, as if she'd heard every story 1,000 times. Around 8:15 we cracked beers and sat on the curb. The night cooled quickly, but remained warm. Stars emerged impossibly clear. I'm not usually one for scenery, but out here the sky was something else. Megan knew her constellations, pointing them out while I tracked satellites drifting overhead. Around 9 p.m., something caught her eye. Low on the southern horizon, a bright white light hung motionless. I initially dismissed it as an aircraft from the nearby Groom Lake base, but something felt off. It remained perfectly still, defying the movement of other objects in the sky. Suddenly, the light began rising, not like a typical aircraft, but straight up with an unnatural controlled speed. We both stood, watching intently. Then came the moment that still haunts me. In an instant, the single white dot split into 2 lights, positioned side by side. No dramatic transition, just a sudden separation. They hovered briefly before vanishing completely. Not fading, not flying away, just disappearing as if a switch had been flipped. No sound, no trace, nothing. When we looked at each other, no words were necessary. Something extraordinary had just occurred. Back in the motel room, an unsettling quiet descended. I locked the door, something I never do, and turned on the TV, seeking comfort. Only static greeted us, the screen flickering before turning an eerie blue. Dan transferred to Phoenix months later. I left the FAA the following year. I've never seen anything like that night again. Nothing even close, but I think about it more than I probably should. The night sky was a canvas of darkness, sprinkled with the Milky Way like scattered salt. Silence surrounded us, broken only by occasional wind gusts. We headed out near Cinder, taking an unmarked trail. Kale Hollow was the perfect escape from everything. No cell service, no traffic, just quiet wilderness. Our gear was minimal: one tent, 2 sleeping bags, a jet boil, trail mix, and canned soup. Kayla brought her big old camera, its strapped fraying at the edges, always ready to capture moments others might overlook. That first night, we camped by a shallow creek about 4 miles in. Earlier at the motel, the TV signal had been strange and we'd left it on just for some ambient light. Around 1 a.m., Megan woke me up, standing by the window. "Something's out there," she whispered. Looking out, I saw the dark desert with faint hill outlines. The security light flickered, which wasn't unusual. Then I spotted it, not in the sky, but on the ground, about 100 yards into the scrub. A weird, round glow, like a stationary, softball-sized flashlight. No spreading light, just a perfect circle. "It's moving," Megan said. And it was, drifting silently just above the ground, gliding left to right in a straight line before stopping. I pulled the curtain closed. We didn't sleep. We sat in the blue TV light, quiet. By morning, everything looked normal. Pale blue sky, fresh coffee at the diner. 2 truckers still played cards as if time had stopped. We checked out around 8. Randy was gone. A woman in her 40s at the desk smiled politely, acting like we'd never met. Pulling out of the lot, I glanced back. Nothing in the sky, nothing in the hills. Our campsite felt peaceful after dinner. We laughed about not constantly checking our phones. She joked about deleting Instagram, but we both knew she'd never follow through. She loved posting too much. Around 3 a.m., something woke me up. The tent fabric seemed to move as if something had brushed against it, but the trees were completely still. When I unzipped the flap to investigate, nothing was there. No animals, just the quiet sound of the creek. The TV signal stayed strong for the rest of our trip, and the stars never looked that clear again. We were alone with no one else around. Kayla was zipped into a sleeping bag, facing away from me. Morning brought an odd conversation that would linger in my mind. During our hiking trip, something felt strange from the start. Kayla had mentioned hearing whispers in the night, but I dismissed it as a dream. Our usual dynamic shifted. Her constant chatter about random topics was replaced by silent picture-taking. Dark clouds rolled in quickly that afternoon, unleashing unexpected rain that drenched us before we could set up camp. We scrambled for shelter under dense pine trees, creating a makeshift and damp campsite. Kayla seemed uneasy, muttering that something felt off about our location. Her camera fogged up, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. That night, a terrifying experience unfolded. A bright white light hovered motionless outside the tent, unlike any flashlight I'd seen. I found myself paralyzed, unable to move or call out. An oppressive presence seemed inches away, just behind the tent fabric. The air grew impossibly heavy before everything went dark. Morning arrived with sunlight filling the tent, but Kayla was nowhere to be found. Her camera remained unusual, as she never went anywhere without it. Her boots were missing, so I initially assumed she'd gone for a quick walk. Hours passed with no sign of her. I circled the campsite, calling her name with increasing desperation. By noon, I was shouting, climbing a rock ridge. I spun in circles, scanning the forest. No trace of her existed, no footprints in the soft dirt. Panic consumed me completely. Around 2 p.m., I abandoned everything. Taking only my phoneless signal, I drove until I found service and called 911. Search and rescue teams were dispatched by nightfall. A deputy kept me at the ranger station while the first group went up the mountain. They found our campsite the next morning, my tent, our food, her sleeping bag, but no sign of Kayla. Then things became truly bizarre. When they asked for photos, I realized something impossible. Every single picture of her had vanished. Not just from the trip, but from my entire phone gallery. Photos from our road trip, grocery store, previous hikes, all gone. It made absolutely no sense. My work brought me to a remote botany field lab in central Utah. Just me, a generator, sandstone, and sagebrush stretching endlessly to the horizon. The station sat tucked in a narrow gulch south of the San Rafael swell, pressed against a small bluff, designed for one person with tiny living quarters and an attached greenhouse. My days were quiet, cataloging genetically variant buckwheat strains and monitoring soil chemistry. That week, the landscape held its bee wreath. Last winter vanished along with Kayla's memory. When I returned from the field station, strange things started happening. At the coffee spot, I asked about her. Dark blonde hair, denim jacket with patches. The barista didn't recognize her name. Same story at the art supply store where she used to work weekends. Back home, her tent still stood with 2 sleeping bags. The blue one had her name tagged inside in Sharpie. K. Darnell, clear as day. Strange how memories persist when everything else fades. She called Fern's Forest squid once, and now that's all I think about when I see them. She lives in my head while the world pretends she never existed. At the gas station, I noticed something was wrong. I told the deputy it had to be a glitch. Maybe my phone corrupted something or the cloud backup failed. He nodded but didn't say much. They asked for her full name. I said Kayla Darnell, spelled it out, gave her birthday, where she worked, everything I knew. They ran it and came back saying there was no record of anyone by that name in Oregon. I thought maybe they had the spelling wrong, so I pulled up my text to show them messages from her. There were none, not a single message from her number. I scrolled through months of conversations. Nothing. I checked my contacts. Her number wasn't saved. My call log had no history of us talking, even though we'd confirmed the trip just 3 days before. I gave them the number anyway. They dialed it. Disconnected. When I got back to my apartment, I opened my laptop and pulled up my social media. Kayla wasn't in any of it. No tags, no comments, no likes. We'd been friends for almost 3 years. We met at a film festival in Bend. She'd introduced me to half the people in my network. She'd posted pictures of us hiking dozens of times. Now, there was nothing, not even her profile. I checked mutual friends. No one seemed to know who I was talking about. I called people, old co-workers, a guy she dated, marked a waypoint on my GPS app, and started hiking back out fast. It was dusk when I reached the trailhead. Tuesday morning changed everything. My custom soil sensors, rigged with an Arduino array I'd built, typically sent data to my laptop every 10 minutes. But that morning revealed a mysterious 5-hour blank spot. Between midnight and 5 a.m. the system had flatlined and then resumed as if nothing unusual had occurred. The night felt different from the start. No breeze stirred, insects were scarce, and the air hung thick and stale. Heat lingered oddly even after dark. I checked everything. Wi-Fi was fine, the generator ran smoothly, but something felt off. In the greenhouse, I discovered an LED grow light with a half-melted plastic casing, as if someone had used a blowtorch on its edge, which seemed impossible given its distance from any heat source. Earlier sensor quirks I'd dismissed now seemed more significant. The night sensor had blared at 2 a.m. with 3 sharp beeps, signaling a dangerous pH drop below 4.0, completely abnormal for this soil. Boots on and flashlight in hand, I stepped outside. An odd scent hung in the air. Not quite smoke, but like burned dust and scorched minerals. The smell reminded me of a lightning strike on rocky ground. When I opened the greenhouse door, humidity rushed out, which made no sense. I hadn't watered anything, and it hadn't rained in days. The glass was completely fogged over. Inside, something was profoundly wrong. Every single plant had rotated precisely, not fallen or dragged, but all facing inward, toward a bare meter-wide patch of soil I'd kept open for new specimens. The ground looked undisturbed yet strangely compressed, a smooth, even circle as if something had been resting there. No prints, no marks. A faint black scorch mark spread outward in a ring about a foot across on the glass ceiling. Spiderweb-like cracks radiated from the center, and the metal framing seemed subtly warped with a strange heat distortion. I backed out and locked the door. The next morning, I checked the time-lapse camera. The footage ran normally until 12:47 a.m. when it suddenly glitched. One frame showed static, then black, then white. The timestamp jumped forward 4 hours. Reviewing the raw image files revealed a troubling pattern. Every file between 12:47 and 4:51 was corrupted and unreadable, nothing more than digital noise. Running a recovery program uncovered 437 mysterious fragments. I sat in the greenhouse with a flashlight, unsure what I might witness. Thursday night, I decided to keep watch. Around 1:30, something strange happened. The temperature plummeted rapidly from 77 to 61°C in under 5 minutes, confined only to the greenhouse. The air felt electrified. My arm hair stood on end. LED lights flickered and then shut off completely. An eerie silence followed. Total stillness. No generator hum, no wind, not even distant insect sounds. I'm uncertain how long this lasted, maybe 2 minutes, perhaps 10. When I switched my flashlight back on, the central bare spot looked darker, as if wet, though no rain had fallen. The plants were slightly teally tilted again, Earlier, while clicking through camera thumbnails, most were just garbage data fragments. A few caught my eye. Brief flashes of color like violet and pale green, as if the lens had captured a sudden burst of light. One image showed a blurry curve of something smooth and metallic in the top right corner, but without any identifying features. I deleted the corrupted files and switched off the camera. That's when the plant started behaving oddly. Gallium leaves curled inward as if trying to close around something invisible. 2 wild barley pots bent their stems at sharp 90 angles toward a central bare spot, maintaining that position even after I rotated the pots. When I moved a fern back to the bench's edge, I found it tipped over and facing the center again the next morning. The next morning revealed more oddities. All 6 soil sensors were burnt out. Plastic casings bubbled, wires melted into the dirt. Strangely, my laptop remained untouched, and nothing else in the greenhouse showed damage. I radioed in, citing a hardware malfunction as my reason for cutting the trip short. They didn't probe further. Before leaving, I collected a small soil sample from the central patch, sealing it in a jar that now sits on a shelf in my apartment. Over the following days, the sample dried out completely. The glass has changed over time, its deep red now fading to a muted gray. A thin, almost imperceptible ring traces the inner edge, where the soil seems to have been nudged away from the center, leaving behind a ghostly residue. Occasionally, when I pass by, a fleeting scent catches me, that familiar burned dust smell that vanishes almost as quickly as it appears. I apologize, but no text was provided in your previous message. Could you please share the original text that you would like me to restructure?